Do you find that there's been a change in the student profile, in the makeup of students?
Yes.
In the 21st century as opposed to 20, 30 years ago?
But I'd say even in the last, especially in Melbourne, in the last 20 years, and especially in the last 10, design is creeping into early school education. Not enough. I think that we should work on this as teachers. But I've noticed that we have quite a different... I sat in very briefly on candidates for positions for next year in industrial design, and I hadn't sat in on that sort of situation, which I'd done almost every year a few years back. And I noticed that they were better prepared. They'd thought about questions more and answers to questions, and they had more significant material with them. But it's still fascinating. One still sorts them out because you can read potential into some and not into others. You can have someone who has done all the drawings, photographs, written pages of stuff, but then you'll find one which, upon responding to questions, I think we've got to have this one, you know, she's fantastic. Despite the fact, oh, don't you think she's very weak on so-and-so? Yeah, sure she is. But, you know, let's have her.
No, it's an interesting situation because your promotion to the position of professor is at a time when research and issues like that have become very dominant in academia.
Yes.
And yet you are able to achieve your promotion without the idea of publishing and doing it through practice, doing
Yes,
it
yes.
and doing the research through practice.
Yes.
Now how, well, put it this way, is this a model for others to emulate, or is this kept amongst the few who can?
No, I think, see, I think it's more tangible to do real things rather than written or presumed things. I mean, I found this very easy to develop. Well, having developed 1,000 other things helps, but I feel that with students, and I'm surprised that they're responding more to drawing and to modeling, to bending bits of paper and thin bits of aluminium and so on. And yet I've sort of felt that the end of that teaching of mine was approaching because you started everything on a computer. And I remember that even in my very heavy practicing days, I always designed the thing by three-dimensional objectivity and then drew it and issued the drawings. So, but to my surprise, this generation of beginning designers are getting more satisfaction from realism than theory.
This is an interesting point because, and it's not a case of equating realism and theory with analog and digital.
Yes.
But it's an interesting point. I had the fortunate experience of attending a wonderful lecture by Ron Arad.
Yes.
And he talked about running a workshop, and the workshop commenced with the play.
Yes.
With materials.
Yes.
Literal play with materials.
Yes.
And through that kind of an understanding,
plasticine.
what happens? Well, in this case, there were sheets of steel.
Yes.
And,
yes.
and yet the product that came out of that was his CD holder.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, just thinking about this idea of being in the laboratory or the workshop, whatever you wish to call it, and playing with the material,
Yes.
and through that understanding, the development of a product, and then thinking about that in relation to the contemporary idiom, which is a virtual environment.
Yes.
And the advent of Rhino and SketchUp and whatever these things
Yeah,
are.
yes. Mm.
Yeah. Now, do you think that this is having an impact on the kind of product that is being designed?
I think it was for quite a while, but I think that period's passed. I think there's more sculptural feeling among young designers now than there was. I think the computer worshipping has passed into the realm where it's simply a very valuable tool. I mean, beats the hell out of drawing boards and pens and inks and so on. But I think that period has passed already.
Now, do you keep up with these kinds of technologies, or do you find it unnecessary in terms of the way you work?
I find that I haven't enough time left to become a computer guru. I'd love to be a computer guru. I'm sure it would appeal to me, but I find it simpler to say to a graduate student or someone that I know is working a lot in computer areas, here's a sketch or here's a model. I'd like you to do so and so and so and so and so and so. Recently I had an episode of designing tires, and I found it very easy to get all the tires with all the variations beautifully prepared and looking like they'd been photographed. And for me to do that, I probably would get to the stage by the end of next year, and I have more important things which other people can't do. So I tend to use, in the same way people use model makers, I now have to use model makers and computer operators and so on. But I don't find that any problem.
Is there any area in design that you haven't engaged with, that you would still like to be involved with?
Probably men's clothes, fashion.
So fashion, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Why men's clothes as opposed to women's clothes?
I suppose because
They're far better to dress, Kjell.
I suppose I would get a continuity of nice clothes. Only recently have men sort of emerged as fashion-wearing creatures. I probably would develop into an all-round fashion designer for women, based on the safety of designing for men first. It's probably that. I've designed some sort of fashion things accidentally. In New York I designed for Rooster ties. I designed about 75 ties for Rooster. Again, that was a result of a happening, because my girlfriend was the advertising agent for Raymond Loewy, for Rooster ties, and for Cartier. And I did 2 watches for Cartier, and I did 1 watch for Hamilton watches. But again, these were serendipities, weren't they? Again, so, you know, again, I suppose if I thought I was going to have another 20 years left, I might like to design yachts. But one can only do so many things anyway. I redesigned my own yacht many times over, and I've redesigned yachts for other people, but that was also an area of mine that was very exciting to work in. But I have actually worked in that area, so I can't say it's a dream. I didn't get the car dream probably because for once I know that it's too hard to crash into Ferrari or Lamborghini, or maybe Renault would have the imagination. Usually I don't like the idea of being rational at a creative point. I think you've got to bury the knowledge brain, the logical brain, while the germ develops into something tangible. But the cars just seem too hard. Although I still dabble in, I'm a consultant to Ford and now to Holden, but in a very trivial sense, really.